Welcome. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Kerry Wiggum, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are on the ancestral land of the Oneida and Onondaga Nations. We are so happy to have you here today to hear one of our visiting practitioners speak. We're really lucky to have practitioners who are working in atrocity prevention all over the world come here to spend a week with us at a time, get to meet all of our students, our faculty, and I know that she's been in some of your classes as well. So I'm especially excited to present this visiting practitioner because in addition to being just an incredible atrocity prevention practitioner, she's also a very dear friend. Eugenia Carbone is going to be speaking to you this evening. Eugenia comes from Argentina. She is the Director of Latin American Programs for the Auschwitz Institute for the Prevention of Genocide and Mass Atrocities, an international NGO that works in over 90 countries around the world, mostly with government actors, on developing public policy for the prevention of genocide, mass atrocities, and other forms of large-scale identity-based violence. In that role, she's also the technical secretary for the Latin American Network for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention, where she manages 18 different Latin American countries and coordinates between them to develop region-specific atrocity prevention policy. Before coming to her job at AIPG, about a decade ago? Yeah. She worked for the Secretariat of Human Rights in the Ministry of Justice of Argentina, where she played a crucial role in organizing the human rights policy of the Kirchner administration, and in particular working with the judicial system to organize trials against the perpetrators of large-scale human rights abuses during the last Argentinian military dictatorship. And to date, thanks to her work and her colleagues' work, over 1,200 military officers who tortured and disappeared 30,000 Argentinians have now been brought to justice because of the work that they've done. So I'm really happy to hear that Eugenia is here to speak today about atrocity prevention in Latin America, challenges and opportunities. Please join me in welcoming Eugenia Carbone.
Thanks, Kerry, and well, good afternoon to everyone. Thanks, I-GMAP, Max, Kerry, for the invitation. Thanks the Dr. University also for the invitation. And thank you all for sharing this space with me and for having shared some very interesting conversations during the whole week. And I have also been part of some of the classes, so it has been a very rich experience for me. And this is an opportunity to talk more about what at the Auschwitz Institute for the Prevention of Genocide we developed in terms of genocide and mass atrocity prevention, but also to get to know some special and very concrete examples of the actions that we develop in Latin America. Specifically when we talk about how we plan and how we implement projects related to atrocity prevention. As I was mentioning, the Auschwitz Institute works globally to provide technical assistance and to provide and increase institutional capacities for develop plans related to atrocity prevention. This means also to strengthen public policies for the prevention of mass atrocities. And of course, when we talk about how to improve or strengthen institutional capacity, means also one of the most essential tools, that is training and capacitation. So this is how AIPG works. What I will be telling you is how AIPG works in all the regions that we work, but also specifically, I will be telling you or describing you particularly how we work in Latin America using AIPG's methodologies. My proposal for this afternoon is to talk about generalities of the atrocity prevention approach, but then to show you some of the substantial and operational elements that we use in Latin America, and then to tell some good practices or examples of concrete actions. This is something that we have been discussing with many of you during this week, how this turns to be something concrete, how it is possible, or is it possible to think and to plan and to definitely implement concrete measures of policies that impact positively in the life of the citizens in our region. So this is the idea for this conversation. At this point, it is important, and I'm sure that we all agree, that genocide and mass atrocities are not spontaneous or isolated events that appear from one day to another, but they are processes. They are complex and multi-causal processes. That's why to think and to plan atrocity prevention as a process is a must. We cannot spontaneously create an atrocity prevention plan, a plan for prevention. No, this must be done in a sense of process, with a sense of process. In this context, IPG, and for working in this field, IPG has created some special materials or models in which we can identify how to work within a cycle of prevention, how we should be able to identify when to apply primary prevention, when to apply secondary prevention or tertiary prevention. Just as a refresh, we can talk about primary prevention that constitutes the analysis of the governmental, historical, economic, and social factors that can put a society at risk of atrocities, and also to develop some options to mitigate these risk factors. So, to identify them, but also to develop ways or options to mitigate them. To identify and to mitigate, sorry. Then, secondary prevention, it is related to those immediate efforts, political, economic, military, diplomatic, legal efforts that are implemented during the crisis. And this is just as a strategy for make visible this crisis, but also for limit and stop the mass violence. This is what we call secondary prevention. And tertiary prevention are all the efforts aimed at building resilience in post-genocidal societies. This is how to help those societies to reconstruct, to rebuild, to become resilient after the atrocities that they have been through. The idea of the tertiary prevention, of course, is related to prevent the occurrence and reoccurrence of this kind of atrocities. So this is just a model for us to organize our work when we talk about a genocide prevention plan, genocide and mass atrocity prevention plan. As Kerry mentioned, I work in the Latin American program of the AIPG, so all our energies and responsibilities are focused in what is happening in Latin America, and in this sense, we perform efforts related to primary prevention. We are very concerned and very occupied in trying to observe the situation of the countries of Latin and conditions of almost all the countries of Latin America, and help designing plans and policies for addressing tensions and risk factors that occur at regional, national, and local level. So this is how we face this responsibility of implementing an atrocity prevention events. As you may know, Latin America is going through a moment of institutional and democratic awakening that, as a cause or consequence, generates and deepens risk conditions related to governance, economic and social conditions, social fragmentation, and conflict history. Some example, I can mention you some examples, but I'm sure that you also can identify many others. Massive and very dangerous movements, situations of displacement within the region. This is something that it is happening right now, and it is also a cause and a consequence of the situation of institutional awakening or democratic awakening in our region. Social demonstrations and the institutional reaction from governments, mainly security sector in our countries, with hundreds of people injured, hundreds of people dead, hundreds of people detained, that have been escalating since 2019. This is something that is a phenomenon that we have been observing, and includes of course to deepen all our commitments in terms of working with public officers, but mainly to those public officers that have responsibilities in matters of security, in how to deal with security, in trying to help them being prevention agents instead of perpetrators of human rights violations. Another situation, the rise of all forms of discrimination and violence, that also is something that has been rising. And the particular and negative impact that this discrimination and violence have over vulnerable groups. I'm talking about groups indigenous, such as indigenous populations, LGBTQI people, migrants and refugees. This is how we are observing these conditions, this increase in discrimination and violence, and how much we need to adjust and to put more efforts in trying to protect these particular groups, together with the whole society, of course. So those are examples of some of the situations in Latin America, but also for me the opportunity to share with you, because I want to provide some positive ideas or some positive examples on how to deal with this, or how we are dealing with these specific situations. And I will try to share with you some concrete examples that AIPG, together with the Latin American community, are developing. And this is, again, to make this happen in the context of an early prevention plan, and to make sure that this then apply, or all this applies into public policies within governmental agendas, and then these public policies have a positive impact in the life of the societies and the communities. So this is what we want to share with you. As we were talking, one of the main challenges that we all have when we work in prevention is to identify that we have problems, that there are problems. And this is something, and when we talk about problems in this context, it is tensions, social tensions, or several risk factors within societies. And that challenge involves also the responsibility to recognize the existence of this problem instead of deny the existence of this problem. In this sense, America Latina has made big advances in terms of recognizing that there are problems and they need to work on that. One of the main good examples about this recognition is the creation of the Latin American Network for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention. This is an informal platform that is constituted by state institutions of Latin American countries that work together to discuss, to dialogue, to think together policy solutions around the necessities of the problems detected in the context of their own performances within the countries, but also in the context of the discussions that are held in the context of the Latin American network. So this is a good example of recognizing that there are problems in all societies at any time, are problems, are tensions, are certain risk situations that have to be addressed, that have to be recognized, and creating this type of platforms to work around these problems is a good model, is a good example. Another of the good examples that we can take from the Latin American network is that since its creation, the Latin American countries that are members of the network have identified where to apply all the prevention efforts. They have recognized at the very beginning, this was in 2012, that the Latin American network was created, and since that moment, they have identified that they will work together, or whenever they discuss or whenever they work around the genocide prevention strategy, they will work around efforts for fighting against discrimination. At that moment, and this also happens now, there was a recognition that the situation around discrimination, mainly against very vulnerable groups, was a big problem. That's why this was part of the agenda of the Latin American network since the very beginning. Then, another of the main pillars or topics or concerns of the Latin American at that moment was the situation of extreme vulnerability of certain groups in Latin America. At this point, when the Latin American was created, those groups were indigenous populations and LGBTQ plus people. That were the two main groups that countries decided to prioritize when we talk and when we thought about prevention strategies. This is not a static list, but it is something very dynamic. So, several years after this, the members of the network, together with AIPG, decided that migrants and refugees should also be part of this list of populations in vulnerable groups, because it was just that moment in which the crisis, the internal crisis in Venezuela, provoked all the mobilization of people from Venezuela to neighboring countries such as Colombia and Peru. That's why, and Ecuador. That's why that was included also in the Latin American network agenda. And then another of the pillars or challenges detected at that moment was to keep efforts related to memory, triumph, and justice in each of the countries of the region. This is something that I was mentioning before. This is something that has to do with tertiary prevention. This has to do with building resilience within societies, and this includes keep all the efforts, existing efforts in Latin America related to transitional justice, memory, truth, justice, reconciliation in some countries, and reparations. As part of this strategy. So this is another way of recognizing and facing the problems that the Latin American countries have detected. Also, I mixed with Spanish word, sorry. Also, but important is to mention that although the Latin American network is mainly integrated by public officers, by public institutions, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministries of Governance, Ministries of Justice, Ministries of Defense, Office of Ombudsperson, National Commission on Human Rights, just to mention some, they were open and they were convinced that this kind of dialogue, that these kind of efforts at the national level should be done together with other relevant actors of the society, human rights organizations, the academy, the university, or the educational community, and then also, well, the corporate sector also, but this took more time to define and include in these efforts. So this is how I can mention some of the efforts of the Latin American network to recognize and to work on those issues. But then there are other ways and more concrete ways to work and to try to think and articulate prevention plans. And at least in the way AIPG does these kind of initiatives, they all include efforts related to training, the necessity to have trainings and capacitation, efforts related to implementation, to implement, to become ideas into real policies, to real measures, and then the idea of expansion. Expansion is networking. Expansion is the possibility of inviting as much relevant actors as possible to think and to plan for consolidating robust agendas in this sense. Training, so not only within the Latin American network, but also as part of our mandate as an NGO, non-governmental organization working in the field of genocide prevention, AIPG has been offering trainings on the foundations of mass atrocity prevention. This is necessary for everyone who is interested and has responsibilities in this field, needs to know which are the main elements, which are the main contents, which are the historical events that we need to know and that we need to take into account, such as a learning experience. So this is what it is often when we talk about training in mass atrocity prevention. We offer not only these seminars or virtual courses related to the foundations of mass atrocity prevention, but also we design specific or thematic seminars that apply some specific situations, such as the situation of the migrant population through an atrocity prevention lens, the situation of LGBTIQ people through the genocide prevention lens or through genocide prevention tools. So they are general in terms of content, general seminars and virtual courses, but also they are very specific and specially designed seminars and courses related to this kind of things. In Latin America, and I have two colleagues here, Stephanie, that is dealing with particularly the online courses, so she knows a lot about how these topics, these concerns appeared and are part of the agenda of AIPG and are part of the regular offer of courses to all the Latin American community. Of course, these courses are in Spanish for the Latin American community, but there are courses in other language for the rest of the regions. More than 800 participants from Latin America has already participated in this kind of courses. So, and many of them have came because of the recommendation or the recommendation of the members of the Latin American network. Then, talking about implementation, that this is part also of the methodologies that we use when we try to articulate and to think about a plan for genocide prevention. This is the development of tools and plans, at first for monitoring the risks, for generating evidence of what is happening, and to have a better sense of what we need to develop, of what policy solutions we need to implement in each of the countries at any moment, at a particular moment. So we have this first moment of monitoring, of collecting evidence, and then the opportunity to put together this evidence and to implement concrete measures, concrete policies that respond to the information compiled and resulting from those research. There are many examples on how AIPG and many of our colleagues in Latin America has been working in implementation. I can mention at least 2 examples, and then if you can, and if I have time, perhaps I can mention another. And the first one is technical assistance project that we have developed in Colombia, and we will be talking about Colombia today very much. That we have developed in Colombia just at the moment of the first moments of the crisis of Venezuela, where Colombia were receiving thousands and thousands of people that were looking for better conditions for their life and security. So at that moment, we were called to think together with the Office of the Ombudsperson of Colombia on good strategies for helping government and the government institutions and the Office of the Ombudsperson to think on ways to provide better integration of these persons into the Colombian society, to prepare certain tools to help the government, but to help the society also to integrate the migrant population. At that moment, well, this is something that then we were invited to do in Ecuador, in Brazil, and in El Salvador, taking into consideration all the development that we have done in Colombia. In general, what we have done at that moment was a baseline report. We have made a diagnosis, we have made research on the situation of these persons, but also the situation of the communities at the very local level in the territories of Colombia, so to identify where were the risks, which were the risks, and to think about a set of recommendations and to apply those recommendations for developing concrete public policies. So that was done together with a pack of training spaces that were in-person seminars and virtual courses. This project particularly began before pandemic, but then finished during pandemic. So everything had like in-person moments and virtual moments. Well, so trainings for public officers and members of the civil society organization of Colombia, again, to train them on the foundations of mass atrocities, to know what is a mass atrocity, which were genocides and mass atrocities of the recent past, which are the signs that have to take into account when observing conditions and situations in each particular country. All that has to do with the foundations of genocide prevention. And another, in the part of implementation, we have been part of the design of a map of risks of human rights violations at the local level, at the field level. We have built a methodology for the government of Colombia to make a follow-up and to measure particular risk situations or conditions for people, for migrants living at the interior of the country. Also, Colombia has a particular situation due to a very long internal conflict, so it has a use of complexity when we talk about big displacements of people within the territory. That's why it was so important for the Ministry of Interior of Colombia through the National Department of Planning, Departamento Nacional de Planeación, to count on this material, to count on this map, and to use it, update it, and guide all this information for generating public policies. Also, this project has a big impact in terms of how the government reacted in the recognition and the provision of documentation to Venezuelans that were in Colombia at that moment. At that particular moment, there was a big policy that changed the status and improved the status of refugees and migrants that were that have been arriving into the country, and that was part of the impact generated by this technical assistance process that we have developed together with the Office of the Ombudsperson and many other colleagues from the civil society of Colombia. International organizations, NGOs, human rights organizations, like a very robust group of people working in this. Then, of course, and this was part of the recommendations that we have designed, and we have found the necessity to improve all that has to do with information for improve the security of the people that were in transit, people that were arriving into the country. So we joined the Red Cross, UNHCR, and the International IOM, International Organization for Migrations, to develop pieces of communication, pieces of information, and we joined in some campaigns together with the design of the webpage that it is still alive. If you want to take a look, it is infomigrar.com, where migrants have very particular recommendations that they have to take into account before deciding to move to another country, to Colombia, and then viewing their transit in Colombia. This is an example. This project also inspired us, together with I-GMAP, to go on working within this situation of migrants and refugees and to still work in Colombia, offering or trying to design a way to help